Well, in addition to those 23 years with opportunities that have been used, the European Union kept going, it evolved. It was enlarged on 3 occasions, as you mentioned, with 13 new members. One member, of course, leaves infamously.
I was going to say it also shrunk.
Indeed, very recently. So, how much has the Union changed in the last 2 decades, and have the Union's capacities to handle and solve continental problems improved or diminished in addition to these 23 years of missed chances?
Well, I think I will mention Brexit here, which of course is one of my nationalities. I was very, very fortunate that I had a grandfather who in 1896 had the good sense to be born in Newry, County Down in Northern Ireland. And that event in 1896 enabled me to apply for an Irish passport in 2016 after the Brexit vote had gone in favour of leaving the European Union. So mercifully I'm still European. But this was actually quite a big event because at the time there was a surge of populism throughout Europe which had complex roots, and the Brexit vote and what happened after the Brexit vote as the United Kingdom negotiated its departure from the European Union made a lot of people in Europe sit up and say, actually, I don't think it's such a good idea that we should leave the European Union because it's a big, big kerfuffle. It lasts for 7, 8, 9, 10 years, and then your economy drops by 6%, according to the Bank of England. I'm quoting the Bank of England there, over a period of time. And so that had an effect of stopping anti-Europeanism within the European Union. It also, for populists in general, it had an important lesson, and that is, if you want to secure power as a populist force in the European Union or in the United States, don't promise something that you can actually achieve. Because the populists of Britain said, we're going to leave the European Union, and they did it. And they then are responsible for all the mess that comes afterwards. Whereas if you're a really smart populist, you're always promising something that for the future which can never be realised. So the European Union changed in that, and it was a significant change in terms of the Balkans as well, because the United Kingdom had always been a big supporter of the expansion of the European Union into southeastern Europe. And one of the reasons I deeply regret the Brexit referendum is it actually damaged the prospects of expansion into the Western Balkans. Now, we're in a situation now and I'm unfortunately anticipating one of your next questions here, but I think it's important to say, in 2023, where the impact of the tectonic plates shifting in geopolitics are now really beginning to be felt around the world, not just in Europe, although it's very important in Europe. In the past month, we've had the incident in Bańska. We've had the growing realization that the Ukrainians' counter-offensive has pretty much failed. We have had the cleansing of 120,000 souls from Artsakh, Nagorno-Karabakh into Armenia, which was on the news headlines for about 5 minutes and disappeared. Who's engaged with that problem now? And then, of course, recently we've had Israel and Gaza. Now, these are huge problems to the background of growing competition between the United States and China, Europe trying to decide where it stands in that conflict. And it's only been a month, but you look back at Bańska and you think, actually, compared to everything else that's going on, this was a kind of sort of farcical, almost comic event if it weren't for the fact that 4 people died. But secondly, you look at the Serbia-Kosovo issue, and compared to Ukraine, compared to what's going on in the Middle East at the moment, this is a problem which is soluble. This is a problem which we can solve. And if I now were in the higher echelons of foreign policy making of Brussels, as a proud Irish citizen, I would be saying, look, let's just put a big effort into getting Belgrade and Pristina to compromise over this, because then we can say to the world, yes, we are competent, we are able to assist people in bridging their differences, with a problem which for many, many years people considered to be utterly insoluble. And so with the shift in geopolitics around the world, let's turn what looks like a crisis into an opportunity.
You've just given a very good idea to someone here to implement your approach to populism, so I hope that no one will use it, because we already have had experience with that. But Ivan, what is your opinion? Have unions' capacities to handle and solve continental problems improved or diminished?
I think it's somewhere in between. One must mention that with the end of the wars, at the end of the bombing, I think that there was a feeling in the European Union that things had gone quiet here, and that a kind of slow process of integration, democratic transition, as we called it then, would be engaged. And there were, of course, the Central and East European countries were really rushing to join. The model countries were Poland and Hungary. We can come back to that, what happened to them. There was a sense that things were advancing. And then at the end of the 2000s, we hit the financial crisis. Then we hit the migration crisis. Then we had Russia's invasion of Georgia first in 2008, then the 2014 invasion de facto of Ukraine and annexation of Crimea. And so the EU had its hands full, and they knew, and I maintain, that there won't be war here. There will be horrible incidents like we had in Bansko, or the May's kerfuffle between KFOR troops and Serbian thugs who were there doing it. But we did war in the 90s. That's the horrible thing. And all of these societies are completely exhausted by that. There's no force. You can rattle weapons, etc., but there's no real, there was a famous poll asking, were Serbia to go to war with Kosovo, would you go? That was one of the strongest results. It said 80% of people did not want to go to war. Of those who wanted to go to war, they were mainly above 50 years of age, and not the young people. So this was a poll, I don't know, 5, 6, some of our colleagues, I'm sure, know about it. So I think there's no willingness to that, but the problem is that the rhetoric in the region of our leaders has not calmed down. And when you look at the tabloid press, for example, in our country, after all the calming words on interviews at CNN, like recently, you have the tabloids who are fighting a war with everyone in the world. But let me take you back. You asked me about transatlantic relations. I think it's important to mention here, because it is a key component of what is happening. One is that of the 6 Western Balkan countries, 3 are already full members of NATO. So it's Albania, it's North Macedonia, and it's Montenegro. And on the positive side, and completely agreeing with Misha that people should look at, in the hierarchy of world conflicts, this one in comparison is, I would say, relatively simple, without neglecting the difficulty. You look at Northern Ireland, still not solved. So between 2 democratic countries, Ireland and the UK, it's difficult. So it's even difficult here. But Having said that, I think that, and here we need to mention the Russian invasion, a nuclear power invading a sovereign European country of 41 million people, Ukraine, that this was, for me, in my world, this was a second 1989 in terms of what Misha rightly calls tectonic shifts. This was a huge tectonic shift, equal to 1989, and if you did not understand that this was a tectonic shift and that you had to react on that night or that morning and realign yourself, then you were not really working in the self-interest of the state and society. What do I mean by that? It means that Europe woke up to two facts. One is that European security and defense is impossible without the United States. Europe does not have the military capacity to defend itself were it to come to an invasion. And secondly, the energy dependence on Russian gas and Russian oil. That was the sort of the huge wake-up call on that morning. And most European countries have shifted away from Russian gas. There are some exceptions, as we know. The country of Austria, where both Misha and I are working now, have imported more Russian gas than others, but they have all introduced sanctions. My question, as a naive question, is why is our country, Serbia, the only country in Europe not introduced some kind of sanctions? The Russians will not feel it. We're such a tiny country. Our relations in terms of trade are nothing, but what we have said is that we are not really aligning ourselves with the path that we want to follow, direction Europe, right? And so the Americans are there to stay. This will not change. I fully support the idea of strategic autonomy that Europe has been talking about, and President Macron especially, but we have a long way to go. So to your question, is Europe capable? Yes, it is, if it understands the geopolitical, geostrategic, and geoeconomic importance of coming here. Europe understood that even before the Russian invasion of Ukraine. We remember von der Leyen coming here and giving money for the Belgrade Niš railway, not to mention other things. And she announced it in Tirana just 3 days ago, the growth package of about 7 billion in the next 5-6 years. So Europe is awakened, but we must understand, and maybe we'll get to it or not, to the complexity of this enlargement, because now, however strange it may seem, the Western Balkans are being pulled by Ukraine and Moldova because of the invasion of Russia. Europe understands that its security begins at the Russian-Ukrainian border, and it cannot leave us, the 6 who are candidate countries for so many years. It must pull us along. But, you know, if you, in the famous joke, if you don't buy the lottery ticket, which means if we don't start reforming and introducing more rule of law, we won't feel the pulling effect of Europe, because they are already saying, do we want another Hungary or Poland, until a few days ago. But fortunately in Poland, they found it in themselves to elect a democratic pro-European coalition.
So you have just mentioned America, and looking globally, we have both been involved with many global issues. Misha Glenny has covered, as you saw from the list of his books, the global criminal world, dark market, Brazilian favelas in the last book, and even we have been directly involved in analyzing and promoting transatlantic relations. So with your experience, what is your assessment? Has the world become a safer or a much more complex place in the last 2 decades?
I don't think it's a safer place. It's definitely more complex, but there are positive signs as well. I think, for example, after the experience of Trump, Biden has fashioned his presidency very carefully, and in economic terms, he has done extremely well in the United States, to the extent that it is possible that he may end up being recognized as a transformative president. He passed some extraordinary legislation, and it's amazing that he got it through. at the end of August 2022, which is the Inflation Reduction Act. And this has really set the United States on the path to effecting a green transition, but also reorganizing its industrial base in a way that it was sorely needed. Interestingly enough, Trump talked about a lot of this, about investing in infrastructure and so on, but he did very little about it. Biden has actually not only talked the talk, but walked the walk as well. Now, is this going to be enough in a deeply polarized world with a lot of uncertainty to secure a second term for Biden's presidency? Not necessarily is the answer to that, if only because Biden is now getting old and he's occasionally visibly quite old. He is determined to stand, as I understand it, as president next year, and he will almost certainly be facing Donald Trump. And there's an old saying in the United Kingdom attributed wrongly to Harold Wilson that a week is a long time in politics. A year is like a century in American politics. So we don't know what the situation will be next year, but there is no doubt that there is concern across Europe and in Canada that Trump will win the next election. There is no doubt that Vladimir Putin's primary strategy for Ukraine is holding out until the American election. And so the United States is having an oversized influence. Domestic politics in the UN, which is looking particularly dysfunctional at the moment, including within the Republican Party in Congress itself. There's been a breakdown in governance in the United States. And so a lot of people are looking anxiously at what will happen. Personally, I think there have been some positive developments as well. I think Lula's victory over Bolsonaro in Brazil is a very positive thing, as measured by the dramatic decrease in the deforestation of the Amazon since Lula returned to power. And it's important that we focus on these positive and good things, because the real challenges that we face, such as climate change, such as the proliferation of nuclear weapons and the breakdown in the system of nuclear weapon treaties that we've been seen fragmenting over the past decade or so, and also the enormous challenge posed by artificial intelligence and quantum computing a little further down the line. We have to have planetary cooperation for these issues. And so we really require the United States, China, India, the European Union, Brazil, Indonesia, and other major states whose acts have a disproportionate impact on the rest of the world. We really need them to find creative ways of cooperating on a diplomatic, political, economic, and social level.